Okay, so you're probably aware that Ben Shapiro has a show called Debunked, which supposedly debunks left-wing arguments, or something. On YouTube, I occasionally get this one commercial for this show where a mini debate on taxation on the rich breaks out during dinner. During this, a very yuppie and soy boy looking man mentions something about the rich needing to pay their fair share, and the dinner host ostensibly refutes him by citing statistics regarding federal income taxes. As always, this alleged response ignores highly regressive taxes like sales taxes, local taxes, as well as capital gains tax rates, which are far lower than federal income tax rates. The latter is what the fair share refers to when addressing this lack of fairness. So the response is a straw man argument. For comparison, here is a chart comparing the maximum capital gains tax rate against the top marginal income tax rate. Over the last few decades, they've both been lowered, but capital gains have always been taxed at a lower rate, with the exception of a few years during the 1980s. The latter would be lowered under both Presidents Clinton and Bush, raised under President Obama, and then lowered under Trump. President Joe Biden's tax plan would raise the capital gains tax rate if passed in its current form, but it seems highly unlikely this will ever make it through the Senate. Here is the commercial.
You look at guys like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and
Scrooge McDuck.
Exactly. When it comes to taxes, the rich do not pay their fair share, man.
It's a familiar scene, isn't it? A liberal friend, coworker, cousin home from college uses your dinner party to serve up a word salad of leftist mantras. Don't suffer through the bad political theater. Join me every week, and in 15 minutes or less, I will arm you with the facts to counter the most common leftist claims, so you can stand up for what you believe.
Well, what is a fair share? By nearly every measure, the U.S. has the most progressive system of taxation in the world. I mean, the top 40% of earners pay 95% of all federal income tax. So they actually pay more than their share of income. So what part exactly do you think is unfair?
I think they should just pay more.
Bravo. Become an expert. Debunked, Season 2. Only on the Daily Wire.
Okay, as a mathematician and a physicist, I think I'm pretty qualified to say.
The alleged rebuttal is especially disingenuous considering that the very people mentioned aren't accruing their wealth via traditional salaries, and therefore those gains aren't subject to federal income taxes. They are taxed as capital gains and in other manners. From an article in the Washington Post. Likewise, Musk, chief executive of Tesla, paid $455 million on $1.52 billion in income during the same period, when his wealth grew by $13.9 billion, accounting for a true tax rate of 3.27%, according to ProPublica. Bezos, chief executive of Amazon and the owner of the Washington Post, paid $973 million in taxes on $4.22 billion in income, as his wealth soared by $99 billion, resulting in a 0.98% true tax rate. Bezos filed a tax return in 2011 reporting he lost money because of bad investments, allowing him to claim and receive a $4,000 tax credit for his children, according to ProPublica. This is why Warren Buffett has been proposing an increase in the capital gains tax rate for over 10 years, and was heavily advocating for this when President Obama was trying to pass his quote-unquote Buffett rule bill. This rule would set a minimum 30% tax rate on anyone who made $1 million or more, within the course of a year. Needless to say, Senate Republicans defeated the bill.
Billionaire Warren Buffett and his secretary Debbie Bosonic. She's in the spotlight right now for paying a higher tax rate than he does, and now she's speaking out about it for the first time. And ABC's Bianca Golodriga, our weekend anchor, traveled to Omaha yesterday and sat down with them both.
Good morning, Robin. Debbie says she still feels like Cinderella at the ball after this experience. You know, the president singled her out during his State of the Union address, and House Minority Leader Eric Cantor says she will be one of the defining moments of the 2012 election. But up until a few months ago, Debbie Bosonic had never put much thought into her tax rate or that of her bosses. Well, today she says she's representing average citizens who want a voice and want to be treated fairly in the area of taxes.
Right now, Warren Buffett pays a lower tax rate than his secretary.
Just hours after her moment in the spotlight, Debbie Bosonic was back at her day job.
When she goes away for a couple of days, you know, nothing happens. So
what happened yesterday?
Well, I just wait for her to come back.
Bosonic has been famed investor Warren Buffett's secretary for 19 years, but now she's gaining stardom of her own as the face of tax inequality.
What has this past 24 hours been like for you?
It's been magical. I'm still taking it all in. I can't believe it happened. It was like a dream come true.
Bosonic is making waves because she makes less money than her billionaire boss, but pays a higher tax rate than he does.
Yeah, Deb is typical. She's right in the middle.
In 2010, Bosonic paid a nearly 36% tax rate. Buffett, who made $62 million that year, paid less than half of that. Now Bosonic and her boss are campaigning for something the president calls the Buffett rule, requiring millionaires to pay at least 30% in income tax.
House Speaker Boehner was asked about the Buffett rule, and he said, well, we all know that there's a
reason we have low rates on capital gains. That's because it spurs new investment in our economy.
He's wrong. I mean, people like to make money in investing, and they make it if the tax rate's 15% in share, and if they make it if the tax rate's 30% in share.
Buffett made about triple what GOP candidate Mitt Romney made in 2010, yet Romney has been taken to task by some for his tax rate.
I don't blame Governor Romney for paying the tax rate he paid. I blame the U.S. Congress.
Do you think this will be a defining issue in this year's election?
I think it should be a defining issue. Debbie works just as hard as I do, and she pays at twice the rate I pay. I think that's outrageous.
I asked Buffett if he thought that Governor Romney should have released more than 2 years of his tax returns. Buffett says yes, he should have, because he's going to have to eventually. The problem with releasing just 2 years' worth, according to Buffett, is that people will question what he paid a few years earlier. So Romney should just lay it all out now. So some advice.
A little pressure on.
From Warren, yeah.
All right. I love the relationship between the two of them.
They're great. Yeah. They're great.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for making the trip there. I appreciate it, Bonnie.
In the next few weeks, we're going to vote on something we call the Buffett rule. Very simple. If you make more than $1 million a year, now I'm not saying you have $1 million, right? I'm not saying you saved up, all your money and you made smart investments and now you've got your nest egg and you're preparing for retirement. I'm saying you're bringing in $1 million or more a year. Then what the rule says is you should pay the same percentage of your income in taxes as middle-class families do. You shouldn't get special tax breaks. You shouldn't be able to get special loopholes.
Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Warren Buffett, three of the richest men in the world. And yet it's very likely that you pay more tax as a proportion of your earnings than they do. In fact, Warren Buffett once said this.
But I'm paying about the same percentage of my income to the federal government as my secretary does.
Leaked tax returns analysed by ProPublica found that Jeff Bezos paid no federal income tax in 2007 and 2011, while Elon Musk didn't pay any income tax in 2018.
The rich have it different than the rest of us. They make their money holding assets, capital, and we tax capital very lightly.
So why do the ultra-wealthy pay so little tax as a proportion of their wealth? And why can't politicians seem to do anything about it? People like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos didn't become the two richest people on the planet by being paid a salary. Instead, they like to be compensated in the form of shares in the companies that they run. Shares, though, are very different to a salary. You only pay tax, capital gains tax, when you sell shares.
The top tax rate on capital gains is 20%. By contrast, wages, salaries, bonuses are taxed at 37%. And that's just the start of the benefits.
Many billionaires follow a mantra called buy, borrow, die when it comes to tax. The simple idea is that capital gains tax only applies when you sell shares. So simply don't sell them, ever.
A key part of the buy, borrow, die sort of strategy is trying to consume potentially without having to unlock a lot of cash or liquidity that is mostly reinvested into a business.
But there is an intrinsic problem with this strategy, because if you're not being paid a salary and you're not actually selling the shares that you own, how do you find the money to buy yachts and private islands? Well, that's where the borrow part of the strategy comes in. You simply borrow money using your shares as collateral.
Elon Musk can borrow money from a bank, say, and use that borrowed money to buy whatever billionaires buy. And a borrowing in our system is not a taxable event.
And it gets even better than that, because if you borrow money from the bank, you may even be eligible for tax breaks. And then there's the final part of the strategy, the kicker.
When they pass away, they can then go ahead and bequeath it to an heir who does not pay tax when that asset is given to them. In the US, we call that the step up in basis.
Almost everywhere, schemes like this are being used by the uber wealthy to avoid paying tax, all perfectly legal. In the US, Joe Biden tried to torpedo the die part of the buy, borrow, die strategy. But the president's push simply didn't get the support it needed in Congress. Another idea to tax a person's net wealth annually didn't make it either.
Most scholars believe a wealth tax is questionable under our Constitution, which limits the ability to tax property directly.
And that's why many tech billionaires who have made a fortune during the pandemic may well pay a lower tax rate than you do. And the chances of that changing anytime soon are pretty minimal.
Now, at the end of the day, the billionaires, I think, will win. The framework of our income tax rules will not be changed in any fundamental fashion.
This is Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world, thanks to the company he runs, Berkshire Hathaway. Basically, it's a holding company that just owns a bunch of other companies, Geico, Dairy Queen, a huge railroad, as well as a lot of stock in other companies like Apple and Coca-Cola. So when those companies do well and their stock goes up, Berkshire Hathaway stock goes up. When Buffett took over the company in 1965, a single share was worth $19. Today, it's worth nearly $500,000. Buffett owns nearly 240,000 of these shares. This is where his wealth is. But as he's been known for pointing out, Warren Buffett still pays a lower tax rate than his secretary.
She pays at twice the rate I pay. I think that's outrageous.
That's because they pay different types of taxes. His secretary pays income taxes on her salary, but Buffett mainly pays capital gains taxes on his sold stock, and that's taxed at nearly half the rate.
The wealthy are definitely undertaxed.
In the US, the disparity between the richest Americans and everyone else has been growing. And in the last 40 years, the after-tax income of the richest has risen more than 400%, while middle-class income has only risen 50%. The way these people make money is very different than the way these people make money. And they're not taxed the same.
I pay less in taxes than people that work for a living and make as much money as I do.
This is Morris. He used to work on Wall Street. Now he's retired and lives off his many stock market investments.
I own stock in companies, Berkshire Hathaway and Amazon and Apple.
He's a pretty typical one-percenter, except that he spends his money advocating for rich people like him to be taxed more.
I want to live in a country filled with a middle class of people who can all afford to shop in our businesses.
Most people have a normal job. They get a paycheck and pay income tax, ranging from 10 to 37%. But people like Morris, they make a lot of their income from investments, generally stocks and real estate. These investments are taxed as capital gains, and things like long-term stock have a maximum tax rate of just 20%.
I sold some stock recently for $400,000, and my taxes on that are around $50,000. But that $50,000 is far less tax than anyone who has a job making $400,000 a year would pay.
And most of his wealth, well, isn't even taxable. People like Morris or Buffett are worth so much money because of the stock that they hold, but it's not tangible, spendable, taxable money.
I can look at my stock portfolio and I can say, oh, I made $1 million this year, but it doesn't mean I have to pay anything in taxes, because our system is based on only paying taxes when you actually sell something.
Amazon's Jeff Bezos, the richest man in America thanks mostly to his Amazon stock, pays almost nothing in taxes. We value his worth here, but it's never taxed unless it's turned into real money when he sells the stock, and it's taxed as a capital gain. This is one way billionaires are able to be technically worth so much money, but pay so little in taxes. Some billionaires like Elon Musk are able to get loans against their stocks and live off of that. They don't even need to sell the stock to turn it into spendable money. No sale, no taxes.
The fact is, if you're a billionaire, you don't need any income.
There's also a big loophole in capital gains taxes that the rich exploit called the stepped-up basis. If, hypothetically, Warren Buffett were to sell his stock, he'd have to pay capital gains taxes based on his profit, so the cost of the stock minus the original investment. But if he holds off selling his entire life, when he dies, whoever inherits the stock and then sells it would only have to pay taxes on what they earned after they inherited it, leaving all those original gains untaxed. It's part of what's called buy, borrow, die, and it's one way the richest families avoid paying taxes. It's this system and the fact that most taxable capital gains are going to the top 1% that lawmakers see changing the capital gains tax as an easy way to tax the rich. President Biden has proposed closing that stepped-up loophole and increasing the maximum tax rate from 20% to 39.6%, but just for people making more than $1 million a year. Critics argue that it may discourage people from investing in the stock market, or that current millionaires would just sell less stock. But it would bring in more tax revenue, from more conservative estimates of $200 billion over 10 years to double that. It would also mean Buffett would pay a closer tax rate to his secretary. But this pile of unrealized money still goes untaxed.
There's a lot of things we could do to make the system more fair. We could have taxes on wealth. We could have taxes on gains in the stock market.
Most Americans are bothered that wealthy people don't pay their fair share, and changing capital gains taxes wouldn't be the whole solution, but advocates argue it would be an easy place to start.
Our system is making the rich get richer and richer and richer, and everyone else just not.